we have been reviewing the Jesus character, it seems absolutely fitting to move into the direction, the philosophical direction, that I would like to move into at this point in time. Looking at, as I've broken down in my book, Dawn of Devotion, the relevance for the crucifixion of the Jesus character. And to take this resurrection, this crucifixion, literally, according to what the Jesus character stands for, and as we have seen is built upon and framed around, there is a philosophical error that one falls into, which philosophical error we come to understand in Galatians 3:13. Galatians 3:13 reads, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, Cursed is every one that hangeth on a tree. Now there are two main points here. Two main points. The first is the context of redemption, and the second is where the context behind redemption comes from. Now, the one that is hanged is literally accursed. Literally accursed. What does that mean? Garbage, trash, useless. Now, I'm throwing these words out here as we go along. I'm going to show you the Hebrew of what that means. But the one that is accursed means absolutely nothing to the narrative or to the scope. Now, Paul is quoting from somewhere in his Galatians 3:13. He's quoting from somewhere to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 21, 22, and 23. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. So what Paul is saying, it's not made up. He's actually dwelling on and emphasizing a point that is in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the one literally hanged is accursed. What does accursed mean in the language here and in the usage of what this is trying to get across to us? Lana. To translate that, lana. It means poisonous, or as if wormwood or hemlock, therefore accursed. The one accursed is as poison or as hemlock. What is hemlock? If we have to take this word hemlock as it is here in English, put it into the Hebrew, what does that translate out to mean? Well, it translates out to mean rosh, which means poisonous plant, hemlock, poison, gall, notably from serpents, the general poison of or from venom. The one crucified. The one crucified in right context. The one crucified, the one hanged. This isn't me. This is coming from the book itself. Is poison. Poison? Poisonous. Is poison poisonous? When the one that is hanged is accursed. Just have to say that again. When the one that is hanged and is accursed, that's definite. That's unchanging. Unchanging. No matter how many mythologies you want to put to that, no matter how many sources from other mythologies you want to put to that, no matter how many citations, no matter how many experts, no matter how many whatever, that is absolutely definite in the text. That the one hanged is accursed. Accursed, poison, as hemlock. Hemlock, as venom. This is what the one hanged represents. And to build a narrative around such a character as doing contrary to what linguistically and contextually they represent, which is absolute poison and nothing, that's a bit of magic that I can't seem to wrap my head around, despite the text giving us the blatant understanding of what that means. Philosophically, and strictly philosophically from the text of the Bible itself, there is no salvation, there is no redemption from a character hanged on a tree or a cross. There is none. I'm just going to read that one more time from the book of Deuteronomy 21, chapter 21, 22, and 23. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. Why? For he that is hanged is accursed of God. This principle does not change. The one hanged on a tree is accursed. Yet why is it so popular? Why is it so popular in 2024 and in times prior to not really get this going on in our minds? Why does the Bible's perspective, and when I'm saying Bible, Genesis to Malachi, for which, quote unquote, the Gospels are supposed to be based on, why is this not relevant? Why is Bible thought not relevant to what we have going on here? And so speaking, the individual Jesus character is crucified on what is called a quote unquote cross. Now in English, that's what that means to us, cross. But in the language for which this is written, Greek, what does that word cross actually mean? Strauss means strauss, which is a stake or post, a pole or cross as an instrument of capital punishment. I should have said also a stake or post as set up right. Now let's do some reading to further emphasize this. Strauss denotes primarily an upright pole or stake. On such malefactors were nailed for execution. Both the noun and the verb strau, to fasten to a stake or pole, are originally to be distinguished from the ecclesiastical form of a two-beamed cross. The shape of the traditional T-cross had its origin in ancient Chaldea, Babylon, and was used as the symbol of the god Tammuz, being in the shape of the mystic Tau, the initial of his name. In that country and in adjacent lands, including Egypt, by the middle of the 3rd century AD, the churches had either departed from or had travestied certain doctrines of the Christian faith. In order to increase the prestige of the apostate ecclesiastical system, pagans were received into the churches apart from regeneration by faith, and were permitted largely to retain their pagan signs and symbols. Hence the tau or T in its most frequent form, with the cross piece lowered, was adopted to stand for the cross of Christ. Now, this pagan symbol seems first to have crept into the Christian church in Egypt, and generally into Africa. A statement of Tertullian about the middle of the 3rd century shows how much, by that time, the church of Carthage was infected with the old leaven. Egypt, especially, which was never thoroughly evangelized, appears to have taken the lead in bringing in this pagan symbol, the first form of that which is called the Christian cross, found on Christian monuments there, is the unequivocal pagan tau or Egyptian sign of life. Let the reader peruse the following statement of Sir G. Wilkinson. A more curious fact may be mentioned respecting this hieroglyphical character, the tau, that the early Christians of Egypt adopted it in lieu of the cross, which was afterwards substituted for it, and that numerous inscriptions headed by the tau are preserved to the present day on early Christian monuments. Now, why we in 2024 continue to observe a character crucified on a T-shaped object, supposedly of punishment, as a form, observing that everything there is a form of salvation and redemption, when culturally, contextually, and linguistically, Bible dethrones it all completely. Why we in 2024 do not observe what the author writing Galatians 3:13 wants to convey, mind-blowing. But really, it's not so mind-blowing when we can really fathom that in every single age and in every single generation, a Jesus exists and a Jesus is born for worshiping through some form of capital punishment. Until we can catch on to that, we're not going to be able to grasp the ideal experience that the author writing Galatians 3:13 and the overall authors writing the Bible, Genesis to Malachi, would have their careful observer experience.
A Fallen Record, The Christian Transgression, is a book bringing history and the Bible together. We all want to know how the Christian religion began. But does the Bible show error occurring in the early church? This book looks at the origin of the Christian movement, and in a way where philosophical context is shown from the Bible. Learn Christian history from the narrative given by the Bible, and learn how the Bible shows the Christian religion taking another path. In A Fallen Record, The Christian Transgression.
And what is that experience? The author writing the book of John 3, 14 and 15, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Now, what's interesting about this is that this saying is not actually causing the reader, or to cause the reader, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, this saying, to observe an individual instrument of death for its celebration. The author's pointing their careful observer to something else that is supposed to be understood as a symbolic representation of something beyond what is there appearing on the page and in the imagination. First of all, what is Moses lifting up his object of affection on? Going to the book of Numbers. Numbers 21:9. And Moses made a serpent of brass and put it upon what? Moses made a serpent of brass and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Now, what does quote-unquote pole translate to? In English, for us, it's pole, but in Hebrew, it means nes, which is flag or sail, by implication flagstaff, signal, or think banner, pole, ensign, standard, or sail. So there was nothing T-shaped about what Moses was envisioning. There was nothing T-shaped about it. It was the simple pole, up and down, no T-shaped. That individual object of his affection, of their then affection, was placed on and then elevated upwards on. Understanding that the instrument was not a T-shaped instrument, we can really move on from that and get to the second of all, the next point of what the author there is pointing out, which is to move beyond the instrument that is lifting the object of affection up and to observe the object of affection itself. Because it is within the object of affection that meaning, that definition, that reality exists. When we are seeing what is lifted up, that is what is supposed to bring enlightenment. And enlightenment that we don't have to think about. Enlightenment that is already defined for us. Already defined for us to understand. In Galatians 3:13, once again, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is every one that hangeth on a tree. To observe the Jesus character hanged from a tree, crucified on the pole, from the pole, means nothing. The Jesus character crucified on a pole means nothing. There is no salvation in it. In reality, instead of looking for salvation within the act, well, we should actually be looking at what the figure represents. Because the figure literally means nothing, absolutely nothing. Which is why the author writing this does not hold their scope to the literal. They take their scope and they employ allegorical means to understand it, because they know the rule set up from Deuteronomy doesn't change. The one that is hanged is accursed. So if the one that is hanged is accursed, that means they literally mean nothing, but they figuratively mean everything. What does it mean that the Jesus character means nothing literally, but everything figuratively? Once again, we have to go back to Deuteronomy 21 just to revisit this. Deuteronomy 21, 22, and 23. If a man have committed a sin worthy of death, he be put to death and hanged on a tree. His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. Why? For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. Now we just have to think for a second. If it is here that the one hanged is defiling the land, the one hanged, the one crucified is defiling the land. I'm not saying that. That's saying that. Let's read that again. Deuteronomy 21 verse 23. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. If the land here is defiled, and if the one speaking this through quote unquote Moses is quote unquote God, if the land is defiled because of the one that is hanged, what do you think your belief will be if you believe on the one that is hanged as being something beneficial? I think we need to think about that. I really think we need to think about that from a philosophical point of view of what that actually means and what the text is conveying. Because if hanged equates to abomination, if hanged equates to poison, if hanged equates to hemlock, if hanged equates to being cursed and accursed, and if the one that is hanged is poison, is hemlock, is cursed, is accursed, and is left in the land, and that hanged individual then can defile the land by yet being hanged there, is there any celebration? Should there be, after this point of Deuteronomy 21, whether they be a literal person or a mythological figure, of salvation and redemption through such an act, when the principle is here clearly laid? Talking so much about the Jesus character and looking at the scope and the reference for every citation, or for these citations mentioned, as I've mentioned them, it makes sense to philosophically go into the relevance of this character. And the relevance of this character, not in a literal sense, because one cannot, according to the philosophy within the scriptures, literally employ any bit of courage in this figure. Not because of anything we may think or imagine, or whatever stance I may be advocating, but simply due to the text itself. This is where the understanding is. I'm believing, I'm understanding, and I have been and continue to experience, and I'm experiencing the understanding for the devotional experience is within the text itself. Everything that kind of goes against what's in this text comes from outside of it, which is something that has to be philosophically recognized for the well-being of the devotional conversations, thoughts, feelings, actions, and behaviors. Philosophically, the one crucified means nothing. Literally is not a stance for salvation or a stance to represent anything concerning the human soul, the human epitome, the anything of that realm, esoteric, however you want to think about that or put that, that's not what's going on from Genesis to Malachi. If we are going to apply Genesis to Malachi to what's going on in Matthew to the Revelation, principle doesn't change. And if we're going to take the Bible as a text that is credible, we can't forget how in the book of Malachi it says of the voice speaking and supposedly uttering what we are supposed to hold as valuable, I change not. So when we're seeing the one that is hanged is accursed, and the author of Galatians beautifully taking that and doing what they will with it in a most perfect way, we have to understand the application isn't literal, nor was it ever intended to be literal. The application was meant to be figurative. And when figuratively applied, when figuratively understood, that's when the experience can be what it's supposed to be. Not held down, but regenerated or refreshed within the thought process of its conscience.
We are to have, as is said and believed when it comes to life and religion, faith. But when it comes to exercising faith, a very crucial aspect of having and exercising faith isn't mentioned. In order to have faith in anything, we need to know what we would have faith in. This book looks into how the Bible defines the process of justification. We are supposed to know what we believe. Personal knowledge will bring life to our experience with the Bible. Get justification to know how to safely take care of your faith.
The Jesus character does represent everything we think that character should represent, but not in a literal way, because the representation isn't for what is material or what is natural or physical or what is biological or what is semi-biological, what is extraterrestrial. There is no literal salvation from one hanged. Now, I'm not just saying that outright. I'm going from the philosophy within the text. There is no one and nothing that connotes salvation from hanging, salvation from crucifixion, literally. And yet, author of Galatians 3:13, Christ hath redeemed us from the law. That's it. That's all. Because if you had to take that literally, there would be no redemption, there would be no point, there would be no deliverance, there'd be nothing that this individual hanged is beneficial for anything. Can't look at it literally. That's why this author here does not look at that literally. It's figurative and it's allegorical. And it's allegorical because it points to actually what one is supposed to be delivered or rescued from, and what that quote-unquote one is that is supposed to be delivered and rescued. 1 Corinthians 15:56 reads, "The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law." That's an evident fact for what this represents. How can we know this? Galatians 3:13 confirms it further. How can we know this? Genesis 1, 2, and 3 confirm this. The great controversy is not about human plight, not about human fraudulence, not about human sin, not about human frailty, not about anything you want to think about that in that secular, religious, esoteric realm. That's completely false to the Bible's narrative. I can say that because that's what the text says. The issue at hand is the issue magnified in Romans chapter 7. Romans 7, 4-6, "Wherefore, my brethren, you also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ." That's absolutely blatant. That you should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. For when we were in the flesh, this isn't literal flesh, this is the devotional conversation when you are moving by the stimulus of the body of your belief, which were and always are going to be by the religious law, it did work in the members of that body? Death. But now we are delivered from death, which is being delivered from the law, the religious law, that being dead wherein we were held, we should serve in newness of spirit, and not in the oldness of the letter. That's the point for the relevance behind the crucifixion of the Jesus character. It's not about taking away your literal sins. You won't get that. It's not about securing you eternal life. You won't get that. You won't get that. Why? Because the one hanged is poison. To literally believe on this, you are literally poisoning your belief. But to observe this in a credible fashion for which it is supposed to be observed, to digest it philosophically, and to observe the figurative illustration connoting the rescuing of your and my devotional conversations, thoughts, feelings, actions, and behaviors, well, what's being brought out is an experience. An experience, Isaiah 61, of liberty. An experience of liberty. And the liberty has nothing to do, primarily or firstly, with the human being, but with the being within the devotional conversation's character. And it has to be primarily, according to the philosophy at the core of the scriptures, with the being at the core of the devotional conversation's character and conscience, because it is only through the adjustment of that will our human being find the correction it needs for well-being. That's how that goes. That's how that's supposed to go. That's the trend, and that's the idea behind the Bible's philosophy, which can and will only be understood when rightly discerning what the individual devotional conversation is supposed to be redeemed from.